War returned to Europe in a way the world did not expect. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, it did more than redraw borders. It forced NATO into the most severe test of its 75-year history. For the first time since the Cold War, the alliance faced the real possibility that a major conflict might spill directly onto the territory of its members. The fighting unfolded right along NATO's eastern edge, just kilometers from the borders of Poland, Slovakia, Romania, and the Baltic states. And suddenly, capitals across Europe were asking the same question. If Russia succeeds in Ukraine, who is next? What NATO was built to prevent? To understand the shock felt across Europe, we need to go back to 1949. Just 4 years after the end of the Second World War, 12 nations, led by the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and France, signed a new treaty, one that declared an attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. They called it the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, a defensive pact designed to contain the rising power of the Soviet Union. The fear was simple and justified. After 1945, Soviet troops remained across Eastern Europe. Moscow controlled East Germany and exerted overwhelming influence on Poland, Hungary, Romania, and the rest of what came to be known as the Eastern Bloc. The tension exploded in 1948 when Soviet leader Joseph Stalin ordered the Berlin blockade, cutting off all road and rail access to Western-controlled sectors of Berlin. The West responded with the largest air supply mission ever attempted. The message was clear. The Soviet Union would push. NATO would push back. The alliance expands, and so does the divide. As the Cold War deepened, the alliance grew. Greece and Turkey joined in 1952, West Germany followed in 1955, and it is here that your requested addition fits historically. In 1955, in direct response to NATO's expansion, the Soviet Union created its own military alliance with communist governments across Eastern Europe. This alliance was called the Warsaw Pact. For decades, Europe remained divided into two opposing military systems, NATO in the West, Warsaw Pact in the East. Two alliances with two sets of armies, facing each other across a continent. Everything changed in 1991. As the Soviet Union collapsed and the Warsaw Pact dissolved, many of the former communist states abandoned Moscow's orbit. Several of them, including Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and later others, eventually joined NATO. The division that had shaped Europe for nearly half a century vanished overnight. But Russia never forgot it. Ukraine, the battlefield between two visions of Europe. To understand today's crisis, you must understand Ukraine. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union until 1991. It sits between Russia and the European Union, connected to both through history, culture, and trade. Large Russian-speaking communities live in the east and south of the country. Because of this long, intertwined shared past, Putin often argues that Russians and Ukrainians are essentially one people, a narrative he uses to strengthen his political position. And yet, Ukraine has increasingly tied its future to Europe. In 2019, Ukraine amended its constitution to declare membership in NATO and the European Union as national goals. For Moscow, this was unacceptable. Russian President Vladimir Putin insists that Ukraine is historically part of Russia and that Western influence in Kyiv represents a direct threat to Russian security. Meanwhile, the United States and its allies maintain that Ukraine, as a sovereign nation, has the right to choose its own alliances. This collision of visions lies at the center of the war. The first flashpoint, 2014, the crisis began years before the 2022 invasion. In 2014, after Ukraine's pro-Russian president was removed from power, Russia seized Crimea, the first forcible annexation of European territory since World War II. Russian-backed separatists then took control of large parts of eastern Ukraine. NATO did not deploy troops into Ukraine, but it dramatically reshaped its presence in Europe. For the first time, the alliance stationed multinational battle groups in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and a separate brigade in Romania. These units were designed as a tripwire, a clear signal that any attack on NATO territory would trigger a collective response. Russia demanded the withdrawal of these forces. NATO refused. 2022, a new invasion, a new Europe. On February 24, 2022, Russian forces crossed into Ukraine from the north, east, and south. The shock was immediate. NATO activated defense plans across Europe. The United States deployed additional forces to Poland and Romania and put thousands of troops on heightened alert. But Washington and London repeated the same message. We will support Ukraine, but we will not send our own troops into the country. Instead, they poured military aid into Ukraine. The United States supplied Javelin anti-tank systems, Stinger anti-air missiles, HIMARS rocket launchers, air defense systems including NASAMS and Patriot through allies, billions of dollars in ammunition, drones, radar, artillery, and support equipment. The United Kingdom supplied NLAW anti-tank missiles, air defense systems, heavy artillery, military trainers until the invasion began, additional forces to NATO missions in Poland and Estonia. Other NATO members, Denmark, Spain, France, the Netherlands, Germany, and many more, sent fighter jets, naval vessels, troops, and equipment to reinforce Europe's eastern flank. It was the largest military repositioning in Europe since the Cold War. The bigger strategic shift. Russia argued that NATO was moving too close. NATO responded that it was defending its own territory, not invading anyone else's. As the war continued, NATO expanded again. Finland joined the alliance in 2023, doubling NATO's border with Russia. Sweden joined in 2024, ending decades of military neutrality. For Moscow, this was the opposite of what it wanted. For NATO, it was a consequence of Russia's own actions. What NATO is preparing for now. Today, NATO has placed hundreds of aircraft and naval vessels on high alert. Its 40,000 troop response force can be activated at any time. It now operates expanded battle groups in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovakia, forming a continuous defensive line from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. The goal, deter Russia from pushing the war beyond Ukraine's borders. The question no one can ignore. Europe has been transformed. A war that began over Ukraine has reshaped the entire security structure of the continent. Russia says NATO has come too close. NATO says Russia is the aggressor. Ukraine says it is fighting for survival. And the world is left watching a conflict whose consequences will echo for decades. The fundamental question remains, can Europe return to stability, or is this just the beginning of a much longer confrontation? Thanks for watching. This is US Mag.